welcome to the third episode of BiblioSophia. We are very pleased to have Greg Kaminsky on the show today to speak about his over 12 years of experience in podcasting with the Occult of Personality podcast, which was the first occult podcast, and about his two recent books, PRONAOS, Reflections on the Preliminary Practices of Buddhist Tantra and from a Western Perspective, as well as his recent Anathema publishing book, Celestial Intelligences, Angelology, Cabala, and Gnosis, Giovanni, Pico, della Mirandola's Quest for the Perennial Philosophy, which was illustrated by the great Joseph Uccello. So to get things started, I wanted to hop onto something that you covered in your Thoth Hermes interview. A little paraphrasing here, you said the glamour was taken from writing by the act of writing, and you were left with the knowledge gained from writing. This sort of reinforces an awareness of the illusion that there is ever truly some prize at the end of any endeavor. One must enjoy the doing and not the product. Have you enjoyed writing, and do you think you'll continue to write books in the future?
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, that's a good question. I do enjoy writing, probably a little more now than I did while I was working on this research book and paper, but I do plan to continue writing. I mean, I feel like I am a writer on some level, and so writers write, and I do write, and I'm sure in the future, if all things come together, then there will be more books to be read. So yeah.
Well, that's very good to hear, because you never know with these things where, as an author, you could go into write. It's such a huge endeavor to write a book that sometimes when you get to the end or one or two of these things, you say to yourself, man, this isn't a road I want to go down. Or you say, like a Stephen King type of person, like, this is what I'm made for. I can just keep pumping out books for the rest of my life. So I guess maybe you'd fall somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think I'm the type of writer who needs to truly be inspired and have a compulsion to write about a certain topic. Otherwise, I do find it virtually impossible to commit the time and energy required to do it.
Yeah, that's as you sort of mentioned with in your last interview with Thoth Hermes, that your professor was saying you sort of are going to have to go so deep into your thesis that you'd better really truly love the topic that you're covering. Otherwise, by the time you get to the end of this ordeal, you are going to hate it with all of your existence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the type of person who, if I love something, then there's almost no amount of effort or difficulty that can't be gone through. But if I'm even remotely not interested, then there's nothing that can make me put that effort and devotion into it. So it just seems like it's a natural process.
Yeah, that's good. And I totally feel that. So how has the knowledge gained from writing Celestial Intelligences changed you as a person, if it has at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has. I mean, I talked about it in the prior interview, this sense that of wanting to know and then working on this book and then coming to understand that this desire to know was not actually a way to become wise or gain any kind of understanding, if you will. I mean,
Yeah.
you can know every fact and every story and every bit of information about everything, and that won't actually bring about any wisdom, because wisdom is really being able to apprehend reality as a whole, not as distinct, discrete bits of data and information. And so, first there's like the recognition of it, and then there's really grappling with the implications of that and understanding that the entirety of the path of knowledge, while it could be put to good use, in and of itself can't really bring about, understanding the truth of reality. So
Yeah.
that was difficult, because on one level I felt like I was deceived by all teachers and the world in general. Like, there was this sort of implied understanding that if you learn all the things and become expert in at least one or more of them, that somehow you will become wise and and truly understand like what life is, how to live, and be able to do that. And that's just false. It's not true in the slightest. And so there's just a real like reconciling of the fact that there wasn't a clear path to understanding reality that I could discern. I mean, I'd seen, many examples of systems that purported to be that, but, they were ostensibly a way to become enlightened or to understand the truth of reality. But when I looked into it, they did not do that, even for the people who seemed to put them together. And so it was during the time I was writing this and realizing all the things I'm saying here that I met my current teacher, who explained to me the reason for this dilemma and the way, to sort of go in the opposite direction, and in order to realize wisdom. And so, yeah, I mean, as a result of the process of writing this book, like, my life changed 180 degrees direction, and now I'm doing things that I would never have expected or even been able to guess at, really. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And so, to sort of take that a little bit further in what you're saying here, I wonder if you could, well, you said in the Thoth Hermes interview that your practices before Vajrayana Buddhism were cobbled together and not really going anywhere. Would you like to expand a little bit upon what those practices were at that time before you started on the path that you're on now, or before you sort of evolved into that path?
I mean, mostly what I was doing was the pentagram ritual, the middle pillar meditation, and a lot of like different Kabbalistic prayers and things of that nature. And then sort
Yeah.
of like a meditation practice that kind of was woven together with those things. And yeah, it was enjoyable, and I had some experiences, but it definitely wasn't really going anywhere at all. It was kind of like, you know, someone who takes up a hobby and thinks they're doing more than they are. Like, it was like I was like learning to cook, and I was like having this idea that somehow I would be a master chef by just following like do it yourself recipes for like a half hour every morning, and
Yeah.
thinking that somehow that was going to bring about some huge transformation. And, obviously that's not even possible. So, it's a lot. I mean, a lot of it is like just a maturation process and coming to understand what's real, what works, and what doesn't, and mostly it's like, how do we lie to ourselves? I mean, that's really at the crux of all of this.
Yeah. Um, so do you think that was sort of a personal thing for you, or do you think that this is a wider problem for people that um, work with sort of Western styles?
Well, it's both. I mean, it's not a
Yeah.
problem for everyone because a lot of people have no real interest in being serious enough that they could actually change who they are. So for the small minority that are engaged in this to actually become a different person, then yeah, it's a problem because it doesn't truly have the potential for the transformation that we would like to think that it does. And that's not an attack or a degradation or in any way insulting to anyone who practices Western esotericism or the traditions themselves. It's just you have to know kind of where the map is leading. So if you're on a path, you want to know, well, where's this path go? Because not all roads lead to Rome, as they say. Some roads lead to Wheeling, West Virginia, or Pittsburgh, or Youngstown, Ohio. I mean, so you got to know what you're doing and where it leads. And, if you're practicing chaos magic and you think that you're going to become enlightened, that's probably mistaken. But if you think you're, practicing chaos magic because it's fun, well, and if you have fun doing it, then objective achieved, and there's there's no problem.
Yeah, I think there is a point to be made about the outcome that people are looking for in the path that they're following. You know, there's obviously within Buddhism, there's very much a path to enlightenment where that is absolutely the main and final goal of the thing. Whereas a lot of magic traditions, it's sort of as a I'm doing this to make a particular thing happen, or maybe people just do appreciate the path and not where it's taking them. But yeah, I think especially with a Buddhist or Hindu path, or any a lot of Eastern traditions in general, that path to enlightenment is very much the main goal.
Yeah, and I would just like to clarify because you're correct, it's the main goal, but no, it's not in any way a final destination or an end. Because what happens is if one were so fortunate enough to be graced with to obtain self-realization or enlightenment, well, then one would realize that their work has only just begun. That there's
Yeah.
no end to practice, there's no end to the work, there's no end to trying to benefit beings because the beings just keep on coming. So it's not an end, it is a goal, but it's not an end, and it's important that people understand that, I think.
Yeah. Um, and so I wonder if, like, if you see something special about the Buddhist tantric path over the Hindu side of this, and if there's anything you really have to say on that topic of the differentiation between the two, because um, there seems to be a lot of certain differences, but also overlap, and I think for people that aren't too familiar with either of them, it can get very confusing.
I don't know. I don't have much to say about it because I don't really know the Hindu path or any
Yeah.
particular Hindu paths any more than maybe anybody else listening to this. So
Yeah. Well, that's fine.
I didn't choose Buddhism because I find it particularly compelling. I chose Buddhism because I met my teacher and that's what he teaches. And if he had taught plumbing, I'd be talking to you about plumbing right now. And I don't know if that makes sense to you or the people listening, but that is actually how it is for me.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. And as somebody who hasn't had that experience, I can't personally connect to it, but I absolutely see the point that you're making. You know, when something resonates with you, it just there's no explaining why it resonated. You just have to follow where it takes you. And
Well,
when that thing resonating is your teacher, then you are listening now to their teachings.
yeah, I mean, I think this is more difficult, I think, to understand. Like, if someone identifies as like a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim because their connection with the divine is through the book. They're people of the book. But
Yeah.
Buddhists are not people of the book, right? Our connection with the divine is through our guru, a living
Hmm.
master. And so we don't look for a connection with the divine through a book or a set of teachings given by someone who's been dead for hundreds or thousands of years. Although we might read it and take inspiration from it, that's not the direct sort of impetus for what we do. It's the guru, and then by extension, the practices that the guru teaches, because those are the direct connection with the divine. And so it's a different thing because it's more important to have the connection with the guru and the divine than it is to be beholden to any particular path or system, because it's the guru who makes this all work. It's not the path, it's not the practices, right? The practices don't work. It's like we work and the guru then kind of makes it happen. And that's the way a tantric path works, which is considerably different than a more Western religious path.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And again, it's a bit harder to relate to that, but I certainly understand the point that you're making.
And then I would
And I,
go,
I really think there is no relating to it if you don't have that experience of meeting your own guru, you know?
yeah, and then I would say there's a further consideration, which is that, like, at its very origin, Christianity is the same exact sort of thing. I mean, Christ was a guru. I mean, he told his disciples, give away all your possessions and follow me.
Mm, yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
guru.
I very understand that. That's sort of how I've looked at things. You know, a lot of the different major religions, that their sort of figurehead is an enlightened figure, you know, as you say, like they're a guru. You know, Jesus
Yeah,
was a guru, Muhammad was a guru, Buddha was a guru. There's always, you know, you look at the different like actual people that go by the name of guru, like by that title, I should say. In Hinduism, it's much more apparent directly through Hinduism and Buddhism. But yeah, that's something that I think Christians have a hard time coming to terms with. But it really, when you look at it from an outside perspective, it totally makes sense that like you're doing the same thing that all these other people are doing. You just picked his path and now you're following him still 2,000 years later. And, you know, through the Catholic system, to some extent, you know, the current pope is the new incarnation of Jesus. And that sort of, well, not directly, but that sort of path is still sort of being followed even in Catholicism if you look at it from through that lens.
yeah. I mean, it's like you know, still having Christ as the main figure. But I mean, even in Jewish Kabbalism, they have the tzaddik, or in
Mhm.
Sufism, the Starret, or I mean, in Orthodox Christianity, they have the Starrets. In Sufism, they have a master. So it's it, it's almost universal in the esoteric, except once you get to like ceremonial magic, Freemasonry, alchemy, things of that nature. I mean, in Freemasonry, they have the ostensible master of the lodge, but that's an elected position and it's not indicative of wisdom in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love Western esotericism, but I understand now that it can't deliver what I'm truly seeking.
Yeah. Yeah. So, on that topic, at what point in your life did these ideas start to resonate with you? I guess Western esotericism was your initial interest, I suppose, up until I guess quite recently. So when did that sort of spark rise in you?
I mean, it was right around like 2016, 2017, while I was finishing up this book and met my teacher. And but I mean, I'd been having some like experiences for years that kind of been leading me towards this. So
Yeah,
it was kind of felt inevitable in many ways.
yeah. So but then, like, how far back did your Western esotericism interests go? Like, was that a thing that started in your childhood or your teenage years or your 20s?
I think it was actually my early 30s,
Oh, okay.
and I became interested in it because at the time I had a, by conventional standards, I had a good job
Hmm.
and a nice place to live. And I should have been happy, but I really wasn't. I felt like incredibly unfulfilled. And I didn't really understand why, even though I guess it should have been obvious. And so I started looking for meaning, like, what does all this mean? And that kind of led me into ancient religion and symbolism and the occult and all of these ways of trying to understand who we are and what we're doing here, and that maybe there is some meaning to it all. But that kind of occupied me for many years, I think. you know I mean, that was really a good 10, 12 years or so where I was just kind of like looking at the occult and esoteric traditions and trying practices and joining groups and reading a lot of books and talking to a lot of people. And I learned a lot, but mostly I just learned to see all of the ways that I wanted to be different and wasn't actually able to change. And that
Hmm.
became incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. I can very much relate to that sort of timeline. Well, in my childhood, I guess I would have most connected with Catholicism up until I was 13, and then I started looking into other religions at that age, and then just decided, like, if these people are all going to hell, this isn't for me. And I then became an atheist, for a devout atheist, for the next 20 years after that. And it wasn't until my early to mid 30s that I really started to have questions about these topics again, and look at it through a more open minded lens.
Hmm.
And now I'm sort of in the midst of
Hmm.
where you probably were towards the beginning of your And that's sort of my next question is, was Occult of Personality a way of helping you find out even more of these different paths? Or, had you already sort of understood these topics well before that, or was that your way of exploring it while sharing it with the world?
Yeah, it was definitely my way of exploring it and sharing that. I felt like it would be better to do it in a way that benefited other people and not just myself. Because I think on some level I sensed that if I just do it myself, like it's going to end up just being self-serving completely. And it already felt that way. So it seemed important that I not isolate myself so much, because I felt like the very nature of the topic was kind of isolating. Not many
Yeah.
people are into it. You don't want to be open about your interest in it publicly for the most part. And it felt
It's not the
like,
thing you go to a work party and talk about over some beers.
right. And I think I already was feeling pretty alienated in general at that point. So I was really looking for a way to, like, not only be interested in something and learn, but also connect with others who were interested in learning about it also. And I've enjoyed podcasts ever since I first discovered them. But there was, at the time, there was no podcast that was discussing these topics that I wanted to hear about. And I also felt like, well, I want it, but it's not. So why can't I just make it happen? And at that time, it was like, I don't know, 2005 maybe. It just seemed like the internet was a place where there was much more potential, and like the possibilities seemed a lot more open. And
Yeah.
it was before social media. I mean, it was
Yeah,
just a
social
different
media ruined
world.
all that.
Yeah, it's a much different world. And so I'm glad I got to experience that, because I don't really think it'll ever be like that again.
Yeah, it felt like a brave new world back then where anything was possible, and that was before, yeah, before, marketing and advertisement and all of that through, social media was sort of presented to us as to be the perfect thing, and then that just sort of pigeonholed itself into direct targeted marketing from, again, the corporations are stomping on us.
Yeah,
So
it definitely feels like a narrow canyon of, from like a wide open plain of infinite possibility to a narrow canyon of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
yeah, and it seems to me that it must be interesting for you because you sort of had this feeling and you started doing this thing with these long form conversations with people, and for many years in between there, that was, we want the 30-second snippet, we want the 5-minute interview, we want the quick short, get to the point, and then now it's sort of coming back around to people realizing, through really popular things like Joe Rogan, where, even the meathead sports guys can sit there for 2 or 3 hours and listen to a conversation, where people are coming back around to realizing, like, oh, long form conversation and listening to somebody really delve into a topic has a lot more value than listening to their quick marketing speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, if you compare it to food, it's like, fast food compared with, like, something like where you raise the animals and the vegetables like yourself from the very beginning, and then process them and like cook them, and then you eat them, and it's an entirely different experience.
Yeah, it's the end of a journey instead of just what you picked up off the shelf that afternoon, or at a fast food, like what you ordered on the menu 30 seconds ago.
Right, and someone else does all the work, and you just wolf it down, and you're off to your, whatever you're doing afterwards with. And you'd be lucky if you spend 30 seconds thinking about that food.
Yeah. So with the occult of personality, did you know what you wanted out of that from the beginning? And do you feel like there was an evolution of the podcast, or has it stayed consistent to your vision, throughout?
I didn't ever had any like ultimate goal with the podcast. I just enjoyed it and just enjoyed doing it. It definitely has undergone kind of an evolution. I think in the beginning it was kind of me flailing around trying to learn. And then it became me as like a participant, insider, kind of peer at some point of the people I was talking with. And now I feel like it's kind of taken another turn where it's like I'm intensely interested in the subject matter, but I'm no longer intimately involved with it in the same way. And
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
it becomes like, at this point, it becomes a way to sort of highlight the things that I find worthwhile and valuable.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times that's really like kind of approaches to life or different ways of being or methods for transformation or ways of kind of deepening one's connection with the divine. Those sorts of things I find much more compelling now and try to draw those into the interviews that I do.
Yeah. So you started your master's at Harvard in 2010. Is that about right?
That's right.
So the podcast started before that. Was your master's, was that from the beginning part of this journey that you were also traveling in your podcast? Was that part of this path of discovery, or were you going into that from a different perspective?
No, it's definitely part of the process, but it wasn't originally part of my plan. I had met a Jesuit priest named Father John Brown who was attending seminary at Boston College. And we met and talked. And from the moment I met him, I was deeply impressed with his intellect, his knowledge, the way that he was able to discuss these subjects, even though he didn't consider himself an occultist in any way. And he had a certain way of being. It was like, I don't know if you're ever around someone that spends a tremendous amount of time each day in meditation or prayer, there's a certain gravity or power that they have within themselves. And it was clear that he had this sort of thing. And after speaking with him for probably less than an hour, it was blatantly obvious that I needed more education because I intellectually, I really couldn't keep up with him in terms of not only what he was talking about, but the way he was able to analyze it and discuss
Mhm.
things. And so that's when I decided I wanted to go back to school. And it wasn't really clear where or how I would do it, but I knew that I needed to. And so that's kind of how that began.
Yeah. So what was the field of study then of your masters, and what were your focuses in undergrad before that?
So my master's is in medieval studies, and unless
Okay.
I'm mistaken, Harvard discontinued that for new students while I was still attending.
Oh geez.
Yeah, well, medieval studies has some, it's considered problematic because it seems that many of the people who gravitate towards this field have traditionalist ideas in terms of mythology, philosophy, politics, whatever.
Hmm.
And academia is just not okay with that. Like, if you're in medieval studies, like at this point in time, your peers, they want you to be looking at things like race in medieval times or
Yeah.
gender in medieval times. And I'm not saying that's bad or wrong or anything. But at the same time, that's not what I was there to study at all. I
Yeah.
was interested in mysticism, in esoteric religious aspects of medieval times. And so that's what I focused on. You know, I focused on alchemy, on Rosicrucianism, on Gnosticism, on angels, on ancient mystery cults and initiation. And so those are the areas that I focused on, but it was never with the idea that I was going to become a academic. And the people at the career counseling, made it very clear that they didn't want me going into that either. So
Yeah.
we were in agreement there. Um, Prior to that, I mean, my undergraduate work had like little to no bearing because it was so many years prior, and my focus at that time was political science. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah, and I think by the time I'd reached my senior year in university many years ago, I'd already decided I didn't want anything to do with politics or business or the law.
Hmm.
And it took me a few years to kind of work my way out of that. But
Yeah, I thought politics would be very interesting to learn until I actually took a course, and I dropped out of that course 2 weeks in. I was like, no, thank you. My undergrad was in ancient studies, which focused basically on Greek and Roman history. So
that
um,
sounds interesting.
it was very interesting. Not very good for getting a job.
No.
um, but yeah, so yeah, I can sort of understand the different points that you're making here. Like again, a lot of the focus at my university was on sort of looking at ancient Rome through a feminine perspective, and yeah, that is incredibly interesting. But again, like you said, I was it's a thing that the professors found to be fun, but if you don't thoroughly understand the topic yet, you don't really want to get off into those. You're sort of hopping off into the weeds. That's the thing for you to write a book out about 10 years after you take the courses, not to take the courses about. Is
Yeah, I
was the way I
agree.
felt about it. So not to diminish those topics, but just to say like you're not there. You're there to learn what the building's made of, not to figure out how we're going to rearrange the room.
Yeah.
um, so so then celestial intelligences mostly came out of your thesis paper from what I can tell. So I wondered if you could sort of elaborate a little bit about the specifics of what that thesis paper was, and then what the process was of converting that into a full book.
So the thesis is not entirely different than the book. I mean, the general idea and most of the content is very similar. Um, I wanted to really explore the way that Pico viewed angels, the way he used the emulation of angels as a method, an esoteric method. I wanted to look at the way that Christian Kabbalah originated, and all of those things are wrapped up in the same subject. So, it's interesting. Like at many points along my path in university, people have always said, you can't do this, or you'd be better off doing this other thing. And I just never listened to them because
Yeah.
this is my education. I'm the one
Yeah.
who's paying for it, and I'm going to explore the things that I am interested in. And so that's what I did. And it wasn't much different when the thesis was finished, because I knew the thesis was like, it was a book. It was already a book. Like, and so there were times when I would like get in touch with a publisher, mostly in academic publishers, and present the book, and they would be like, "Oh, this is a great, dissertation, but you've got to elaborate on all of this stuff, and we would love to turn it into a book, but you need more." And I was like, "No, you don't need more. You've got everything right here.
Hmm.
Any added content or deeper explanation of any one of these aspects is just going to be like masturbation. Like, it's not necessary. You've got the
Yeah.
crucial information is all here. It's And I felt like it was well argued and well presented and made a coherent picture of Pico and what he had done. And I'm glad that Gabriel from Anathema agreed with me, because there was very minor modifications. I mean, there's an entirely new foreword to the book that introduces it, and the sort of the implications and the takeaways from it. And there were some minor modifications to the content, but like the major addition is Joseph Fuccello's work in the typesetting, the formatting, the fonts, the illustrations, which are beautiful and brilliant, and the book design as a whole. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
let's be
absolutely
clear. Like,
lovely
I
work.
came up with the content, but this book is the work of Joseph Fuccello, and that's in many ways what makes it something worthy of having on your shelf, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just sort of showing some of the images here, and man, I've got the standard edition, and it is absolutely gorgeous.
Yes, it is. I
um,
agree with you. This is one of
that's
the, I mean, I'm really blown away, incredibly pleased by the job that Joseph Cello did, that Gabriel at Anathema did. It's just really, really amazing. And the entire staff of people who worked on the book, I'm incredibly grateful to them, because they really helped turn this research project into something that's like an object of beauty.
Yeah, it really and it really does to a reader. It really does come out that way as both a work of art and also a work of academia. It to me, it very much felt like an academic read, and I loosely know these topics, but I wasn't by no means am I very well versed in what I read about in your book, and so. Sometimes with books like this that I don't really know the topic going in, I feel that I need to sort of go off and read a little something else or go watch a couple hours of YouTube. And I wanted to give your book a chance to present itself by itself, because I had that feeling in the voice of the book, the way that you wrote it, that you were doing it from an academic perspective, and anybody should be able to go into this, and the pieces will come together as they need to come together. And I smoothly read through the book, and I learned so much throughout reading it, and the questions that I had as I read paragraphs and chapters were answered in later paragraphs and chapters. And
Good.
it's a topic that I am much more interested in now than I was when I started reading it. So, kudos to you as the author of that. And I think it was obviously an excellent dissertation. And, I'm really glad. And that's cool to hear that it didn't undergo too many changes from its original version. I mean, that's a testament to the original version. So, kudos to you for putting it together the way that you did.
Thank you. Yeah, and a lot of credit also goes to my advisor, Dr. Kimberly Patton, because without her help, I never would have been able to write this. And it's really gratifying to hear you say that, because it is written originally for an audience that knew nothing about Pico or the subject at all. And so I had to try to lay the groundwork, from the very beginning. And I'm glad that you think I did that okay, because it was challenging. And but I think it did make the book more readable, and you don't have instances of like inside knowledge where I'm
Yeah.
expecting the reader to understand key concepts or ideas without really explaining them.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, and as I said, I didn't know enough going in that if you didn't do it right, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate the book. I would
Mm.
have had to stop and say, I'm in too deep. I need to do some side research here, and I never felt that I needed that. I want to learn more about these topics now, but what you presented in the book is laid out in the book. If that
Right.
makes sense. Your final conclusions are all built prior to it happening. So yeah, so I absolutely can say for sure from my perspective that that was done successfully, because I wouldn't have been able to understand the book otherwise.
Yeah, thank you.
So, and I, before I read it, I did know a bit about like Giordano Bruno. I find him to be a very fascinating character in history in general, and I want to learn more specifically about him, but just he was just a very interesting historical figure. So I
Absolutely.
wonder what made you pick Pico as your person of choice to focus on over, say, him or Ficino or somebody else of that time, and sort of similar topics.
Well, Pico was the person who was behind the adoption of Kabbalah as the esoteric foundation for Western esotericism. So that was really the main reason I was interested in Pico. And then having read the oration, which is often entitled Oration on the Dignity of Man, like, I agree with you. Bruno's a fascinating figure, and Ficino certainly has his historical importance, but neither of those guys wrote anything that even approaches the majesty of the oration in terms of articulating the esoteric tradition, what it is, where it comes from, why it's important. To me,
Yeah.
that declaration in and of itself ensures Pico's place in the history of great esoteric thinkers.
Yeah,
And
and so
the
sort of to go back to what you were saying before there, like, you've been following this process of sort of trying to find your way to whatever enlightenment is, whatever the core of all of these concepts are. So he spoke to you as being somebody that was closer to that than these other guys were.
Yeah, well, he was closer to it because I think I'm not saying he was enlightened. I'm definitely not
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that. But I am saying that he understood at least what that was and what would
Mhm.
what was what one would have to do in order to become that. He understood, and it didn't involve astrology or divination or magic rituals or anything like that. And to me, encountering him at the time that I did really had a huge impact, because it said, like look at what you're doing. Like, you want to go here, to the top of the mountain, but the path you're taking doesn't go there.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
if you want
important.
to go there, like, the things that are required are like going within, silence, prayer, contemplation, and self-nullification. Those are in many ways the opposites of what an occultist is doing. So it was a big moment for me, like a wake-up call, and there was really no one else in the history of Western esotericism that I could focus on who was going to really take me on that journey in the same way.
Yeah,
The
that makes a
journey
lot of
from
sense.
occultism and magic to, not maybe not yet, but the path to wisdom,
Hmm.
which are two different paths.
Yeah. And so like he didn't really have a standardized system that he put forward. He just sort of was, I guess, presenting ideas. But do you think like a modern occultist could put a system together based around his works?
I think what I think is that Pico could be seen as a syncretist, but he wasn't syncretizing like a buffet where you grab whatever you like or and put it together on your tray and go pig out.
Yeah.
What he was doing was he was trying to reverse engineer the spiritual path from ancient times. And what he was doing was, from a very high level overview, sketching out like these are the basic methods you need to engage in order to realize the truth of divinity. And so that's what he did. And he doesn't say you need to wake up every morning and do this and then do this and then do this. I think he was speaking in such a way or writing in such a way that his audience, such as it were, could read what he wrote and then they would know what to do on a daily basis. Not that it wasn't clear, because it is clear, but at a certain level of education and capability and maturity, one can read his words and know what needs to be done without having it spelled out like a recipe.
Yeah.
In our modern times, for better or worse, we seem to want very detailed instructions about what to do, when to do it, how to do it, what foot to put here, where to put the thing there. Like, that is not what Pico is interested in. He's not a technician. He's not a laboratory worker. He's a mystic. And the mystic knows, like, if you go in within, you follow your heart and it will take you there. And he kind of articulated, okay, you've got to be pure. You've got to go within and make yourself into nothing, essentially.
Yeah.
And you have to focus solely on the divine, because wherever you put your mind, it's not only what you are, not only where you are, it's what you are. And then from that high level overview, one could generally see, like, if this is what I've got to do, it's not just like an hour a day. It's like it's all the time. You've got to be
Yeah.
this way. And he's very clear, like, if you want to be with the divine, you have to be like the divine, because only those who are like the divine can be with the divine. And that is completely and inherently wrapped up in what the divine actually is. And to truly understand that, you would have to be like that. You can't really know it, but you can be it, according to Meister Eckhart. And he's right.
Yeah, and I think that, I think it makes a lot of sense in your personal progression why that resonated with you. And, a thing that I was thinking as I, read this, the way that he presents angels and this concept of how you could sort of humans, if living their lives correctly, could be even above angels. This Christian Jewish context of the topic of angels, do you see that there could be any parallels between that and like the gods of Hinduism or even maybe Greek or Egyptian religions? And because especially in say Hinduism or Buddhism, like these gods are sort of aspects of the Godhead, not that they are an individual entity of their own, but that everything sort of connects back into that one spark of creation. So yeah, do you think that that's a thing that he thought of in that way, of sort of angels and humans all being part of this connection to this one greater whole?
Yes, he did. I mean, clearly the Jacob's ladder concept and the way that functions is evidence of that. Um, but the basis of it is really entirely different, at least in Buddhism. I can't really speak to Hinduism so much because, so like in Pico's system or experience, or the Judeo-Christian realm, like the divinity is the basis, but it's not really defined because it's ineffable, it's unknowable, and but it's not a sort of a negative, and by negative I don't mean bad or wrong. I mean, like, for instance, in Buddhism, the basis is nothingness or emptiness or openness, which
Hmm.
is in many ways, emptiness is sort of a negative aspect of somethingness, not in the
Yeah.
fact that it's bad or wrong, but in the fact that it's not full of thingness.
Yeah.
Um, so it takes a different basis, even though the basis once seen into is actually the same basis. It's just that it has a very different quality to it. And so emulation of angels as a way to achieve divine union makes sense. It's logically consistent with the view and the basis of reality, and it does work. It
Yeah.
actually works. And I think I really spent a lot of time in the book trying to support and prove the fact that what Pico is articulating is the actual spiritual path, and using Jewish Kabbalism to try to show that what he's saying is the exact same thing that the Hasidic masters have said and has produced enlightenment.
Yeah. And so, to sort of switch topics up a bit here, where does your other book, PRONAOS, fall in? Sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, by the way. Where does that sort of fall into this timeline that we've been talking about here? I'm assuming you wrote that after this, even though they were released sort of in reverse to that.
Yeah, I think I wrote the Pronaos book 2019, 20, yeah, around probably 2019. So I
Yeah.
think I wrote that in like 6 months. And so it was a very different experience. Like, there was no research or whatever. Like I'd already done the practices, so it was really just a matter of
Mm.
writing out what I wanted to be in the book. And it's just the different topic, a different experience altogether.
It does seem like it would have been a much different process, like from all aspects of writing, to go from, celestial intelligences is very much an academic work, specifically from an academic setting on top of that. And then this is just directly sort of from the heart, out of your personal experiences and learning and everything that you're doing on a personal level. This is you putting that onto paper. So, how did that process feel different to you in
Um,
the actual mechanical elements of it? Maybe.
well, I think that just the main thing is when you're writing from your own experience, even if you're writing about a tradition or practices or whatever, you don't have to rely on anyone else's authority. And
Yeah.
so you're free to say what you know and to tell people the truth and to also tell them what's not true. And I felt like in that sense it was easier because I already knew the subject. I already had my own ideas about it, and the supporting material was just kind of to bolster my own statements. It wasn't the basis for my statements. My
Yeah.
statements became the basis and they were supporting it. Whereas in the other book, Pico's statements or the, the statements of the Hasidic masters becomes the basis for it. Right. And I can't really support it with my own experience in that way, not only because my experience is not the same or on the same path, but it's also not even allowed in an academic setting. Just kind of like
Yeah.
use your own experience as the proof of your argument. So, in that sense, it was much more rewarding writing experience. And, but at the same time, like these are all progressively building upon each other on some level or way. So I know that my experience in writing the Pico book kind of paved the way for me to be able to write about other things that I knew more intimately.
That's interesting. Yeah, so now, after having written these two different books from two totally different subject matters and different bases of the narrative, do you think that you will in the future write in both of these styles again, or will you be leaning more towards the personal in the future than the sort of academic?
I'm not really sure. I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, it would be easier to write more personal books, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think on some level they're more beneficial because the Pico book is great and it serves like to kind of fill in historical gaps that aren't really well known or readily available. But the PRONAOS book to me is way more useful as a like for someone who's actually interested in spirituality as a way to become a better person or to change who they are. Like there's no
Yeah.
not even a really an argument. I mean, the Pronaeus book is like if you read that, you'll have an inkling as to what needs to happen in order to really grow and change as a person. And the Pico book, you could read that and you'll know things about history and traditions and understand things, but it won't. allow you to actually become a better person. There's no way that just reading that is going to actually clue you in as to like what I need to do next to, to advance on a spiritual path.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And from a strictly from a reader's perspective, it's cool that you can write both in both of these ways, because a lot of people, I think, would only be able to isolate themselves to one of those styles or the other. And and also as a reader, it's nice to read both of those styles of writing. It's Celestial Intelligences certainly taps into the history buff in me that likes to that likes to have somebody fill in these gaps for them in a way that they hadn't been, detailed before, or maybe from a fresh perspective. But then, yeah, obviously, if the path that you are personally on is calling to you to go into a detail on that narrative, then obviously you should, go further there too. So from an outside perspective, I feel like it must be nice to know that you can dive into either of those waters without any trepidation going forward now.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's probably other ways of writing too.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, to me, I'm not so much interested in like trying to pigeonhole myself into a particular style. I feel like the the subject matter in the book will dictate how it's
Mm,
written and the approach. And the PRONAOS book really called for a much more personal, experiential approach, because I'm talking to people who are potentially interested in actually doing this. And
yeah.
if that's the case, they need to know what it is they're going to be getting into, and not giving them what they want to hear, or making it sound like it's not really possible for them to do either. So it's kind of creating a circumstance where the person who's interested has an accurate idea of what they're getting into and still is excited to do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I think we can go ahead and wrap things up here. I really appreciate your time today and for going into some greater detail on these different topics, for supporting this new project that we're going into with BiblioSophia. So, and also thanks to the viewers of today's interview. And if you guys enjoyed it, please remember to like and subscribe to the BiblioSophia channel. And absolutely follow Greg's works, which will be linked in the description below the video. And thank you, Greg. And thanks to the viewers. And we will see you guys all very soon.
Thank you, Michael. It's really been a pleasure. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and the listeners. And if anyone
Yeah,
wants
absolutely.
to contact me after listening to this, my email is brothergreg@protonmail.com. And I look forward to hearing from you.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a good one.